let's start at the 30,000-foot level. Give us your perspective. Is this a one-off? Is this just for show, or are they seriously intent, the Ukrainian military, I mean, on invading Russia and trying to hold territory?
Well, I think that's correct, Mike. Ukraine, and specifically its armed forces, have very obviously raised the stakes with this military incursion into Russia. It is different than previous paramilitary groups going in on a thunder run themselves back on the other side of the Ukrainian-Russian border. What we're seeing right now is different in scale and purpose, and it has a near-term and I believe long-term goal. Near term, the Ukrainians are trying to shift Russian military forces away from the fighting in the east towards their long border in the north with Russia. Longer term, I believe we're seeing something very new here. By occupying territory, Zelensky is creating a potentially powerful bargaining chip in any final negotiation over the end to this war of national self-defense. This is a new development and something that the Ukrainians could achieve if they can hold on to what they have taken inside Russia. As you said, Mike, the first time since World War II that a sovereign country has invaded and occupied Russian territory.
Now, what have you heard about the logistics of this operation? How many are we talking about here in terms of on the Ukrainian military side? How many personnel, what sort of hardware are we looking at?
We're looking at least 2 battalions, and numbers have been all over the place. Somewhere around 1,000 troops could be involved. I do have to stress, Mike, we are deep in the fog of war right now. As is tradition with the Ukrainian government, they are extremely disciplined when it comes to saying nothing during major military operations. They have been extremely disciplined. Just late breaking today, President Zelensky offered the first slight hint into his thinking. He said, well, Russia has been invading our lands. We're going to show them what it's like. Interesting that he stressed lands. Again, it appears that the Ukrainians are attempting to create some kind of military buffer that would protect their northern cities and towns in the event that they could trade that land away. And Mike, that's something for everyone to consider. Right now in Ukraine, the majority of the population is very strongly opposed to trading away Ukrainian land for peace. It would be a political mistake for Zelensky to try. However, what if he were to trade Russian lands away from peace, lands that he has now occupied? I think that's the play here. The Ukrainians have been silent, but we can perceive their intentions by what they've achieved so far.
Mm-hmm. How far are we talking into Russian territory? How many miles, how many kilometers are we talking about?
As of earlier this morning, and again, we are in the fog of war, the Ukrainians had made it at least 6 miles, definitely 6 miles into Russian territory. Some reports, unconfirmed from Russian sources, Russian military bloggers, indicate that perhaps Ukrainian forces have made it farther along. They very clearly look to be moving faster than the Russians were ready for. And that's an important lesson here, Mike. The Ukrainians took a page from Sun Tzu's Art of War. Attack where your enemy is weak, use surprise, and take as much land as possible before they can respond. That's what we're seeing, and it's been well supported with indirect fires, artillery, and logistics. This was well planned and executed.
Yeah, now, it also implies that if the intention is to hold the land in some sort of bargaining chip, that they've got to be able to do that. And the concern has been for some time now the difference between manpower capabilities, personnel on the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, when they're worried about holding the line in areas where the Russian military has been making some ground. They have been gaining ground in their latest efforts. How does the Ukrainian military imagine that they'll be able to, essentially what they're doing is stretching their resources even thinner? So talk to me about that. How do you anticipate that holding up?
Well, the fact is, this is a high-risk, high reward gambit that Kiev is currently playing. You are absolutely correct. The fighting in the east and south of the country has been bitter. We have seen very serious losses on all sides. And the fact is, Ukraine does not have an infinite manpower supply. They are running low, relatively speaking, compared to Russia, on the number of young men and women they can put in a uniform and get them onto a battle line. So by moving towards where Russia has been weak, by encountering what looked to be poorly trained conscript soldiers and perhaps some Chechen irregular troops, the so-called TikTok army from Chechnya, by hitting hard there, they certainly caught the Russians off balance, and now we can anticipate the Russians to hit back. This would force Russia, on the other hand, to move some of its forces, potentially out of the eastern battlefields to harden its defensive lines around territory that the Ukrainians have taken.
Yeah, but if you move, I mean, let's walk through this a little bit if we could. If you move 6+ miles into Russian territory, say a couple of battalions, if that's the case, and you're right. Earlier you said the numbers are all over the place, and that's kind of been true throughout this entire conflict, whether we're talking about casualties or just assessment of existing operations. But if you're talking about moving, say, 6 miles into Russian territory, and you're talking about a couple of battalions, you've got to keep them supplied. You've got to resupply. You've got to maintain contact. You can't just drop them in there and say, hold this turf until some day when we can, use it as a bargaining chip. So talk to me about, from what you've seen, and you cover this extensively, and you've had a great deal of time now to assess both sides in terms of their abilities and resources. Talk to me about where this, from your perspective, will likely go. Again, I keep looking at this and thinking maybe it's a one-off. Maybe it's a bit of a dog and pony show to try to, stick a thumb in Putin's eye. Yes, it's a distraction. Yes, he's going to have to move some troops. But I'm just wondering that the long-term viability of this seems at odds with reality.
I think the Ukrainians are very clearly thinking ahead to, say, 6 months from now. What if there is more pressure from the next presidential administration to force all sides to a negotiated settlement? The Ukrainians, as I said before, there is a political and military dimension to this fight, Mike. A political dimension cannot be underestimated. I think there is some thinking that they needed a bold gambit at this point to take Russian territory, to invade, have this invasion or incursion into Russian territory, hold what they could, and perhaps aim to trade that away. This is shaping up to see a Russian counterattack. Just before we went on, some, again, Russian military bloggers, unconfirmed reports, and voices from inside the Russian government indicated that a counterattack was underway. We may have seen the opening of an additional front. If the Ukrainians can hold it, they will have an advantage for the end game. And I think that's what's driving this. Need, urgency, and a view towards how this fight is ultimately resolved, Mike.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.